It is the most familiar of all miracles. Life from the inside, a human embryo growing within the womb. With advanced photographic techniques and computer enhancement, we can now see for ourselves where we came from. Each of us has made the same journey, beginning with an egg cell. It travels through the fallopian tube. It's carried along by millions of cilia hairs. There's a frantic rush of sperm. And then, egg and sperm together perform the so-called dance of life. Only one sperm out of millions is allowed into the egg. Then, the barrier closes. The fertilized egg now has two nuclei, one from each parent. Here, they fuse, and soon, cell division begins. Within a few hours, there are 4 cells, which become 8 cells, which divide in turn again and again. After 6 days, the ovum has developed into what scientists call a blastocyst. Each cell is slowly acquiring its own specialized function. When the blastocyst enters the uterus, it floats delicately down to the surface. Interestingly, the blastocyst is seen as an intruder and must protect itself from the immune system of its own mother. It secretes an enzyme, seen here as blue crystals, a signal to the mother that the blastocyst is no intruder. Instead, it's something to be nourished and protected. Here, cell division continues, a process that doesn't end until we die. At 3 weeks, the embryo is just 3 millimeters long. But by 5 weeks, it has quadrupled in length. The head is bent down, to the right, above the placenta. At 7 weeks, the embryo is 2.5 centimeters long. The limb buds and umbilical cord have taken shape. By the 12th week, hands and feet have already formed. At 16 weeks, the fetus is 15 centimeters long, and the ears and closed eyelids can easily be seen. Then, in 3 more weeks, it grows to 22 centimeters. All its features are clearly defined. As humans, we pride ourselves on our uniqueness. But among these 4 embryos, can we even tell which one is ours? It takes weeks of growth before the answer is obvious. As we grow, we reveal a remarkable link with other species. A link that not only explains our individual development, but also the development of life itself. Most of us would identify this 6-week-old embryo as human. But what about this one at a similar age? It has what looks like a human hand, but is actually the front foot of a pig. And this hand-like limb is really the nascent wing of a chicken. Our hands, their feet and wings, sharing a common ancestry. Part of a 500 million-year-old evolutionary process that binds together all animals having backbones. From a bird in flight to a hunting carnivore, evolution has worked its magic. Taking a simple blueprint and over eons, building one variation after another, including ourselves. The mechanism of evolution is called natural selection. All animal species sometimes experience sudden genetic changes, so-called mutations. During millions of years, they lead to new features in different groups of individuals. Animals that are better adapted to their environment have a better chance of survival, like those birds that learn to fly. The ability to fly was a revolutionary step forward, refined from generation to generation of primitive birds. The original species changed during millions of years until entirely new races had developed, the birds of today. The evolution of life has taken nearly 4 billion years, beginning when the Earth was young, and meteors bombarded a stark and barren land. Although we don't know how life began on Earth, liquids, gases, and minerals must have supplied the building blocks. Then, somehow, the first organic molecules were formed, most likely in a primordial sea. Over hundreds of millions of years, these molecules reproduced themselves, adapting to their environment and growing more complex. They formed the first template of life, from which everything else has evolved. By 3.5 billion years ago, more advanced one-celled organisms had developed, blue-green algae, which are still with us today. They joined together in colonies, forming microscopic strings, drifting with the current. For the next few billion years, one-celled organisms were the only life forms on Earth. They grew more diverse and even invented a new means of reproduction, which we call sex. They also produced great quantities of oxygen, making possible a myriad of organisms, including ourselves, by altering forever the atmosphere on Earth. The microscopical cause of this revolution was the development of a new and more sophisticated cell structure. It may have been the result of primitive organisms joining together in a symbiotic relationship. The new kind of cell now had a nucleus and other specialized organs called organelles. These organelles, which were sort of microscopical immigrants, gave cells the crucial ability to take on different shapes and functions. One of these organelles became the so-called mitochondria, responsible for producing the cell's energy. Here, the mitochondria are red, almond-shaped organs. Mitochondria are only a few thousandth of a millimeter long. Inside are structures that resemble the inside of a car battery, with a similar function. Small moving dots, tiny factories in a human cell. Eventually, small hair-like bacteria may have given cells the ability to move by themselves. These became cilia hairs. Cilia encircle the cell like so many tiny legs, allowing it to move about and catch its food. Cilia even help their cells perform these curious rhythmic exercises. The next great evolutionary leap occurred less than 1 billion years ago, when organisms with more than one cell first appeared in the ocean. Perhaps they developed from large colonies of single-cell organisms, like this Volvox globator. mute witnesses to the lighting of a slow evolutionary fuse that would one day cause a spectacular explosion of life. The remarkable fuse burned for a few 100 million years, but ultimately, the bomb went off. All of today's animals are descended from the creatures of this era. Even the wide range of body parts that have developed since are, in a way, variations on 500 million-year-old themes. Not that every species survived from that era, far from it. These are just some of the losers in the eternal struggle known as evolution. Fossilized animal remains in clay and chalkstone. Those species that could not compete or adapt to changing environments were doomed to extinction. But while many species perished, others create new opportunities for life. One of the greatest of these evolutionary changes occurred about 400 million years ago. Ancient relatives of this lungfish developed the capacity to breathe the air. They crawled onto the land and made our existence possible. Today's reptiles are relatives of those first land vertebrates, and they have changed very little since then, when their ancestors first learned how to survive out of the water. Some species reverse the process. A four-legged land predator resembling a big dog began an extraordinary return to the sea about 50 million years ago. The result was the dolphin and the whale. This is the skull of that land-based predator, and this is how its shape changed during its adaptation to aquatic life. The nose hole moved up along the head, and the teeth grew smaller to accommodate a diet of fish. So the sea got something back for the life it lost to the land: mammals, breathing air and nourishing their young with milk. And even the mammals that remained on land never abandoned the sea completely. We humans spend our first 9 months in the salty water of the amniotic sac. We grow from embryo to infant in a vestige of the primordial ocean, which the first land vertebrates brought with them when they crawled up on the land. The same is true of this chicken embryo, floating in amniotic fluid inside the egg. Indeed, everywhere we look in the embryonic world, we find links to a common past beneath the sea. We even retain links to the gills of fish, developed hundreds of millions of years ago to provide more oxygen. Placed behind the head, the primordial gills consisted of a number of arches through which blood flowed. Oxygen in the water then passed through the arch's thin membranes into the fish's bloodstream. In time, some of the gill arches were adapted to serve other uses. The need to digest food more efficiently or become a better hunter led to the creation of a more highly developed mouth. The first sign of gills appears in fish embryos at a very early stage. From this point onward, they continue to develop. But before the gills mature, the fish embryo receives its oxygen from tiny arteries in the membrane of the yolk sac, which functions like a human placenta. And we humans have vestiges of gills during an early stage of our development. The arches, visible below the head, look a bit like a mouth. They appear in the fourth week, and for a number of days, develop in the same way as gills. But after 2 weeks or so, they veer off in another direction entirely. Instead of becoming respiratory organs, they develop into the lower jaw, the larynx, and the middle ear. The same traces of aquatic life can be found in other creatures that have left the sea far behind. This chick is just a few days away from birth. It sways in its own encapsulated ocean. Like the human embryo, the chick also goes through an early stage with vestiges of gills. They're visible here as small bubbles on the throat. But a few days later, they're gone. Life in the primordial ocean still reaches across the eons. Even our spine may trace its origins to a primitive marine animal that doesn't have one, the humble sea squirt. These sea squirt eggs are remarkably similar to human egg cells at the moment of fertilization. And the larva of the sea squirt resembles the human sperm. Although the adult sea squirt has no spine, its larva has a spine-like cord running through its tail. But when the larva grows up, it loses the tail and develops into the adult sea squirt. One theory suggests that a mutation might have kept a sea squirt in the larval stage all its life, thus keeping the tail intact. In which case, this minute spine-like structure might have been passed on to future generations. The inch-long Amphioxus developed what many scientists believe is the precursor to the modern spine. You can see it here as a narrow yellow cord that runs along its back. Developing as a part of the miracle of life into the backbone of the blue whale, some 20 meters long. And even the mightier dinosaurs. Our spine is a bit more modest. Here we can follow its development in the uterus from 4 weeks of age. The spinal segments are already shaped, but still microscopic. At 5 weeks, there's a cleavage in the back, running down the center. By 6 weeks, the cleavage has closed, and the spine is embedded inside the body. In this chicken embryo, we can still see the segments of the nascent spine, which will develop into vertebrae and muscles. Here is the pig embryo. And this is the pig's tail after just 3 weeks, developing along with the spine. Here's the tail 2 weeks later. In fact, every vertebrate shows signs of a tail in its early development, even if the tail disappears in a later stage, as it will when this chick embryo gets a few days older. Again, we humans are no different. In this 4-week-old embryo, the beginning of a tail is visible to the right. Like the gill arches of our aquatic ancestors, vestiges of the tail appear in all of us. But by the 6th week, the tail appears only as a small bud at the end of the spine. And by 7 weeks, all that's left is a little bulge below the embryo's growing legs. All animals without tails, from the koala bear to the human, go through the same embryonic stage. No matter how different our final form, all species are bound together by a common past. Consider this tiny salmon embryo, developing its fins from buds visible on both sides of its body. Even it can reveal secrets about our evolution. The development of our arms and legs began with a fish eons ago, possibly the ancestors of this living fossil, the coelacanth. Its advanced fins may have provided the template for the development of limbs in the first land-based animals. Here is a fossil of a coelacanth that swam the oceans about 400 million years ago. By examining the bone structure of its fins, we can find clues to the evolution of legs and claws. With the help of computer animation, we can see how the different bones in the front fins may have been modified over time until they developed into a new kind of limb useful for life on land. Evolution had formed a creature that was half fish and half reptile. The transition took place about 350 million years ago, 3 billion years after the first existence of life on Earth. Legs and claws grew as these early amphibians developed into land dwellers. The reptiles were especially successful in adapting to their new environment, and the most renowned of all were the dinosaurs. The limbs of the largest of them have never been equaled in size. And yet, the same locomotive tools still serve animals today. Animals with much smaller limbs, even though 65 million years have passed since the last dinosaur died. Indeed, no matter how far we travel down the river of time, we'll always find a literal embodiment of the distant past. From the fins of fishes to our own hands and feet. In this human embryo, just 5 weeks old, the buds which form our limbs can already be seen. This is the arm bud, as yet nearly identical to the leg bud to the right. And this is the embryo 10 days later. The buds are now paddle-shaped and increasingly different from each other. But even at this stage, it's still hard to tell a human arm from this front leg of a pig. And the similarity between the limb buds of this bird embryo and the human embryo is equally remarkable. The left bud looks more like a human arm than the wing it will one day become. A small, swift dinosaur, about the size of a chicken, may have played a central role in the development of that new kind of limb. After millions of years, the construction of its forelimb changed shape. The result was a wing with a lighter skeleton covered by feathers. And this is where evolution led, history's first true bird. Long after the dinosaurs disappeared, their relatives remained to fill the skies. All around us, we can see traces of the bird's dinosaur heritage, even in their eggs. Each bird embryo demonstrates how evolution could turn a limb into a wing. Here, the wing still resembles an arm. As it develops further, it even looks like a human hand. From this point on, the wing will grow until it's fully formed, diverging more and more from the hand. As for humans, by the 6th week of life, our hands are well on their way to their final shape. Our genetic program, born of evolution, is guiding their development. To create a hand, our genes must tell certain cells to grow and others to stop. When the cells between the fingers are programmed to die, the shape of the hand is revealed. This embryo is now in its 7th week. By the 15th week, even the fingernails are clearly visible. The cells in a bat's limb are instead programmed to grow until a membrane of skin forms between its elongated fingers. And so, each and every species follows its own evolutionary path from a common beginning until it acquires more and more of its own special characteristics. The chicken embryo in its journey to birth. The pig embryo, from a human-like appearance to its ultimate form. The fish embryo, growing along an evolutionary path far from ours. and finally, the human embryo. This is the saga of life as it unfolds in the egg or the womb over weeks or months. This is the saga of life as it reflects the course of evolution in days instead of millennia. This, too, is the saga of life, as it takes us back to the beginning of the path. And this is our saga. At 4 weeks, a cleavage holds our first brain cells. At 5 weeks, gill arches form structures that will shape the face. At 6 weeks, the eyes begin to appear and the limb buds look like paddles. At 8 weeks, the head is rounder. The eyes have moved closer. Three weeks later, the growing brain helps to shape the head. The eyelids have formed. At 18 weeks, the human fetus is unlike all others. Except for one group of animals, and therein lies the final proof of our evolutionary past. You are looking at a chimpanzee fetus in its mother's womb. The chimp and gorilla are more closely related to us than any other species on Earth. They resemble us more than they resemble the orangutan. Together, we and chimps share more than 98% of the same genes. This is an ape fetus in the 11th week. And this is a human at the same stage. During the development of both, very little distinguishes one from the other. Here is the ape fetus. And here is the human. The hand of the ape fetus. The hand of man. Only an expert can tell them apart. Here are the ape's feet at 7 weeks. And here are the humans. This is an ape fetus a few weeks later. And this is the human. In some ways, the ape fetus bears a closer resemblance to a fully grown human than a fully grown ape. In evolutionary terms, it was only yesterday that we both belonged to the same species. Just a few million years ago, in Africa. Then, we became the upright, walking animals that would one day spread across the world. How did humans diverge from the apes? One curious theory suggests that humans are the result of an ape that remained in a juvenile stage. A sign of this will be that the ape's foot actually passes the shape of the human foot on its way to the final hand-like form. Another curious fact is the ape's appearance. A juvenile can look more like a human than its own mother, but when it matures, it leaves those childish features behind. Even the growth of our brains may be linked to the differences between our two species' fetal development. In the end, our brain becomes 3 times larger than the brain of an adult chimpanzee. But in the womb, our brain and skull remain in a more immature state, so that after birth, they can keep growing. The chimp is born with a more mature skull that doesn't allow the brain to grow much after birth. So, the journey of each and every human child retraces the journey of our species. This is how we all begin our lives. This is how we embody the saga of life. A new family member has arrived. She experiences her first day of life in the outside world. Whatever the individual differences between us, we are but one species that has followed the same basic path through time. We are all the children of evolution. Our journey is long, from the fertilization of the egg, 9 months before our birth, but today we realize that we are but one small part of a much larger story. In every human child, as we have shown in this film, a wonderful story is written. A story which tells of life's development on the planet Earth for the past 4 billion years. This is the greatest miracle on Earth.